Και αυτό το Πάσχα, κάθε γεύση και κάθε μυρωδιά έρχεται πάλι στο πασχαλινό σου τραπέζι με
Welcome to the webinar. Please stand by. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line.
Why is it important to have well-structured soil?
The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. Today is April 29th in 2021, and we're going to be talking about the Springboard soil regeneration promotion that we have going on with the Soil Food Web. And before we get started, I always like to ask questions about where everybody's coming from, and I see some people have already used to that format, and we got people coming from Grants Pass, Oregon, Santa Rosa, Canada, Atlanta, Mexico, Colorado, the Scottish borders. So if you want to just post in the questions section where you're coming from, it gives us a good idea of what kind of audience we've got for today's webinar. Kansas, Arizona, Boston, Rotterdam, Texas, Indianapolis, Canada, Philippines, Florida, Cape Town, New Zealand, Johannesburg. All right, we've got Brazil representing. So quite a few folks from all over the world, which is really good. I love these webinars, the fact that we do have a very international audience that attends. Got some Australia checking in, El Salvador. All right, got a lot of Canada showing up today. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. So just some housekeeping things before we really get to the meat of today's webinar. So everybody's going to be in muted mode when they come into the webinar, and that just helps keep your own background noise. And if you do have a question, go ahead and in the question section, go ahead and submit the question. And we have moderators that will be working in the background to pick questions for the panelists to go ahead and review. So please do use that question section because it's really great to have that kind of interaction with you folks. So let's talk about what we're going to cover in today's webinar. So we'll give a brief introduction about what we're going to be talking about today, and then we'll do a little bit of a deep dive into the Soil Food Web training program and the Springboard offer, and kind of what that's about. And then today we're going to have panelists give a profile, probably about a 5-minute discussion on their business, their operation, what they're doing, and what are some of the pros and the cons of running their own business and things like that. And then we'll get into some Q&A. So if you have questions about what it is to be a day in the life of a consultant or a lab practitioner or a compost production facility, we'll definitely want to take those questions and answer them for you. And then after a bit of time of answering those questions, we'll have an animation for you. We'll be talking about building soil structure. And we'll do some Q&A on that as well. So, the animation's great, should stimulate quite a bit of thought and questions from you folks. And then after that, we'll do, if we have time, we'll do animation number 2, which will be into weed suppression. And we'll do more Q&A. And then if we have time at the end of this, we'll do just some general Q&A of questions that you guys might have. We expect that today's webinar is going to be right around 2 hours in time. All right, so let's talk about the Soil Food Web training program. Now, we really have it broken down into 3 components. One is going to be the foundation course, and this is where you learn the theory and the science behind the Soil Food Web and the practices and the principles that we use. And for many students, that is where they will stop their education. That's or at least as far as the Soil Food Web School is concerned. They're going to get their education, go out and apply it either in their farms or their homes or their businesses and so forth. Other folks wanted to take this to another level and become professionals in this field. And so there's really kind of two pathways you can take there. One is becoming a certified lab tech. So this is where you can do biological soil analysis, and this is where we would assess soil, compost, liquid amendments like extracts and teas and so forth. And we'll talk about how the CLP, what it takes to become a lab practitioner, what the opportunities that you have, doing that kind of business. And then we have the consultants training program. And so this is going to be where you want to be a consultant. You want to advise clients on how to make that transformation from either conventional organic to a biological and using the soil food web practices. And really there's a few tacks that you can take here, or tracks. One is to become a biocomplete compost producer. So making the compost that we use to inoculate our soils and get the biology into the soils, especially in systems where the soil biology has been devoid or really knocked back. So we really truly do need a lot of compost producers out there. There's just not enough of the good biologically complete compost. Others will go down the route of becoming a web consultant, soil food web consultant, where you're going to work with your clients. You're going to evaluate their operation, take baseline assessments of what the soil is in the biology in their soil, and then advise them on the practices that they need to do to get biology in their soil and then how to maintain it for the long haul. And then also as a consultant, a big part of a lot of people's businesses is to also run your soil food web lab so that you can do that assessment of the soil and the compost and liquid amendments and so forth. Okay, so let's do a little bit of a deeper dive into each one of these areas. So the first, like we mentioned, was the foundation courses, and this is where everybody starts, to gain their knowledge. And we've broken this down into 4 chapters. FC1 is really the introduction into the soil food web. And this is, understanding what constitutes soil. What's the difference between dirt and soil? What is the soil food web and what kind of benefits can you achieve from that? How does nutrient cycling work and those types of things? And then also identifying what are the different microorganisms that do make up that soil food web? What's their role? And then some more practical aspects of this is how do you work with the soil food web? What do we do at a client's location to help make that transformation? And then we'll get into some case studies as well. And it's not just agriculture, it's agriculture fields, both large and small. It's talking about golf courses, parks and rec, residential neighborhoods. So there's a lot of areas, really wherever you can grow or have any kind of growing system, you can apply these practices. And then FC2 gets into some a little bit more of the tactical, which is, now we're talking about compost and what constitutes good compost, or what we could like to term biologically complete compost. And we'll get into the history of compost, where compost has kind of started from, very ancient practices making compost to the more modern day, where we can make a lot of large scale compost. And when we talk about making compost, we'll talk about how to make it on a small scale. So you could do it at home. You could do it in your backyard in a very small space, or also making compost at a very large scale. We're talking, thousands of yards of compost at a time can be made. And then talk also about the application methods. So now that you've made this fantastic compost, we now need to get it out into those growing systems. So, how do you apply it? Are you going to incorporate it into the soil? Are you going to top dress the soil? Things like that. And what kind of equipment would you use to do that? And then we'll move into FC3, which is making biocomplete extracts and tea. So these are our liquid amendments. And, now that you've made this fantastic compost that you learned about in FC2, now we want to be able to make these liquid amendments. And we'll talk about what is an extract and what is a tea? What are the differences between those? And why would you apply a tea versus an extract? What are the appropriate remediation techniques that we would use? Then also get into what are the application methods? Are you going to be foliar spraying a compost tea? Are you going to be doing a soil drench with a compost extract or a deep root zone injection with a compost extract? Or are you going to be injecting an extract into your irrigation system? So what kind of fertigation aspects potentially do you have? And then FC4 gets into microscopy. And this is the microscope can be, I think, sometimes an intimidating piece of equipment for many folks. You may have only used a microscope in high school or college, or may have never used a microscope. And that's perfectly okay. We spend the first part of FC4 really helping educate you on, here are the different parts of a microscope. Here's how you tune and tweak it so you get the best observation from your microscope. And really, how to use this tool. And then we get into, once you understand how to use the microscope, now let's actually start identifying or looking at organisms under the microscope. So how do you make your proper dilutions with your soil or your compost? How do you apply them onto a slide and use the cover slips and all that kind of good stuff? But then we'll start identifying the bacteria, the fungi, the protozoa, the nematodes, all those organisms that we want to have a better understanding about, what's the biological profile on that sample that you're looking at. And once you've done that observation, you've now looked at some data about that sample that you've been looking at. How do you interpret that? What does it mean when you see a large number of ciliates or a large number of disease-causing fungi? Or you see a good amount of beneficial fungi or protozoa. And so we want to be able to make some good interpretations of that data, so then we can, decide what kind of remediation practices we want to be able to use. And, it's funny, I actually have a lot of clients that have not taken the courses, but at the end of the day, they want to know what's in their soil, and the microscope is such a fantastic tool for them to be able to use. It is one of those things that if you can't observe it, you can't see it, you can't make very good informed decisions about what to do next. Okay, so that's the foundation courses. And then for those folks that want to move into the more professional route, one of those is becoming a certified lab tech. And this is where you could stand up your own business doing biological assessments of soil, compost, extracts and teas and so forth. And the way this program works is you get assigned a mentor. So this is somebody you're going to work with one-on-one in doing microscopy training. And you have 8 hours of contact with that mentor. And it's a really nice structured program. So there's a lot of homework that you will do on your own. And when you get to your mentor, you can ask a lot of questions and get the details behind some of the nuances that you use when you're actually trying to do this identification work using the microscope. And then there's a certification assessment as well. One of the things that we really are trying to strive for is having standards, so that if a client was to send a soil sample to one lab versus another lab, that we come up with relatively the same numbers. We want to make sure that we get that consistency. And the way to do that is to make sure that our lab practitioners have gone through the same training and that they have the same skill set before they actually start their lab. And so the assessment helps make sure that we've got good consistency amongst all the different practitioners that are out there. And then we've got some additional information on to help you stand up your business. So this is going to be, how do you find new clients? How do you start up your own soil lab? What type of equipment do you need? Your microscope, your camera, all the different, equipment like slides and cover slips and pipettes and test tubes and all that kind of good stuff. And then there's the referral network, which is a really fantastic way for you to get connected to clients. I've had my business on the Soil Food Web School website for quite some time, and I've actually got quite a few clients that have come to me via this referral network. So it's a really good way to make connections between people that want the biological assessments to be done, and they have the ability to find your lab. Okay. The next phase of this is going to be talking about the consultants training program. And so the consultants training program, we broke it into 3 stages. Stage 1 is the how to make compost, biocomplete compost. And it's really important because one of our primary tools that we use to get biology back into the soils is by using biocomplete compost. Again, this is compost that's been made in such a way that has the diversity and the quantity of beneficial organisms to get those organisms into that soil. And so we work really diligently with you to make sure that you have the skills to make good biocomplete compost. And you'll find that, you'll be working with a mentor. So the mentor is going to help guide you through that process and make sure that when you see your issues or challenges, to help explain what those mean, and then how do you actually change them so you can, again, make good compost. And at the end of the day, we're going to make sure that you have the skills necessary before you move on to stage 2. And so once you prove that you can make good compost, now we move to stage 2, which is now making biocomplete liquids. So this is making extracts and teas from that compost that you just made in stage 1. And this, again, is going to be, how do you use your brewers? How do you add food sources? How do you use your microscope to monitor over time? And then also, what types of equipment are you going to be putting this liquid amendment into, and getting them out into your growing operations? And then we have stage 3, which is your final project. And this is where you're going to create a project, work with your mentor to define what are the goals of the project that you have. And what we want to do is we want to prove that you have the skills to be able to take that compost that you just made and the liquid amendments and apply them to your growing situation, and show that you have now transformed it. You made that difference between soil that had either no biology or very little biology to something that now is biologically sound for that plant that you're trying to grow. And you'll work with your mentor to go through this. And once you have gone through stage 3 and you've completed your final project, and you've shown that you've got the necessary skills, you now become a certified consultant. And your name will get, and your business will be placed on the Soil Food Web School. And again, that's a great referral network to get you connected up with those folks. Okay. So let's talk then about the offer. And this is going to be, the standard pricing that we have for the courses is it's $5,000 for the foundation courses, it's $1,000 for the lab tech program, and it's $3,000 for the consultants training program. So depending upon where you want to be, that's kind of the typical pricing. Now we have the springboard offer, which is going to be good until April 29th. And this is where we're taking 42% off of the list price for the foundation courses. So they're typically $5,000. They're being sold for $2,900. And so this is a huge offer. I think it's the biggest discount that we've ever done. Now let's talk a little bit about, what do you get with that springboard offer? So we have the foundation courses, and there's going to be the 4 chapters that we talked about, which is really 63 lectures in total. And so there's a lot of information that you can have access to. And then having contact with Dr. Lane. So we do regular monthly webinars where students post questions, and we answer those questions in the webinars. We also have the foundation course forum. So again, this is another community or an area for the community to interact, where you can ask questions that you can have interactions with students, with the mentors, with the lane. So it's a really good way to be able to make connections with the folks in your community. And then we also have a lot of materials that come along with this as well. There's a course manual that is comes along with the lectures that you're going to be looking at. There's a glossary of terms, references where the scientific literature is located at, and then we have the lecture slide decks that you can go back and refer to. So quite a bit of information that you have access to going through the foundation courses. So that's our springboard offer, and hopefully we'll see some of you in the courses and eventually become either certified lab techs or also consultants and be colleagues out there in the field. So at this point, I think we're done talking about the offer and also the programs, the training programs we have. We're now going to dive into some of the profiles into the panelists, and of course we're going to start with Dr. Lane Ingham. So Lane, you want to go ahead and take it away? And Elena, you might be on mute.
Well, this helps if I actually get myself on the microphone. Sorry about that. So
No problem at all.
thank you, Brian, for introducing me and reminding me that it's not often you can see my lips just flapping. not hear any noise come out.
Right.
So I'm going to try to keep this short because we've got a lot of good case studies for people to enjoy. We want everybody to be able to alter their practices, reduce the amount of cost that it is to you to raise your crops. So you don't have to be buying inorganic fertilizers. You don't have to be buying the pesticides or the herbicides. You don't have to be putting on inorganic materials of any kind. And typically we're going to get the structure in the soil built. One of the animations today that we're going to go through is going to talk about that. What is it that has to happen to have the water infiltrate normally into your soil, where the water will go all the way down and be stored in your soil, not leave your property? It stays there. So come late August, for example, or whenever that very dry period of the year is, you will have that water stored in the structure of your soil so that you don't have to irrigate, or you don't irrigate as much, especially in parts of the world where water is very dear. It becomes a huge savings to not have to irrigate through most of the growing season. So want to give everybody the opportunity to listen to all of their stories. But just as a note, yes, if you join us here at Soil Food Web School, most of the students have talked to me directly. I love answering questions because this is the most important stuff on the planet. We need to do these conversions. And so come on along and learn how to do this in the least financially painful way you can. So thanks, Brian. Back to you.
All right. So we're going to start off with Wes, and Wes is going to talk about his business, Foothill Biological. So Wes, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, so my business is this one right here, Foothill Biological. I am here with some of the other panelists here in Northern California. It's a great location because there's a lot of organic farming going on around here, small farms and that sort of thing, but also not too far away, we have the great Central Valley of California, all kinds of agriculture happening. And I kind of, I kind of look forward to when I become a fully certified consultant, like say Brian and some of our other panelists, and hopefully get to delve into some, bigger and bigger projects having to do with production agriculture. That's where all this is headed. That's where we all believe this is all headed. And I think that's a foregone conclusion. But here I am starting out with my business. I've been doing this part-time for 4 years, I think I've been running this. And it was just a couple of years before that I started studying with Dr. Elaine, took the foundation courses, and then got into the consultant training program where I am still working through that. Yeah, I have had the great privilege of being able to study directly with Dr. Elaine. She used to do, before the pandemic, she used to do these 5-day courses, and I did one of those. And pretty soon I had my lab going. Part-time, of course, I went the route of kind of easing into this with as a side business, doing other things as a day job, so to speak. And then about a year ago, I had the great fortune to become a student mentor here at the Soil Food Web School. So now I get to do all this together. To me, that's just amazing. So my main, obviously my main focus is just doing the lab work at this point. I run soil samples, and right now is one of those times of year in the spring where people are really thinking about what's going on in their soil. Another time of the year is the fall, that you tend to see a bit more traffic, more phone calls, more people calling you up asking for advice and wanting to know about all of these things in the soil and what may be in their soil. So when I first got started, things were a little less structured than they are now at the school. The school keeps developing, but one day Dr. Elaine said, "Hey, all you consultancy students, certification students, would you guys like to advertise on the, put your name up on the website?" And I said, "Well, yeah." And before long, I threw up my website and everything. I hurried up and did that. Before long, I had people calling me, agronomists, landscapers, Farmers of various sizes, people who run HOAs and do the groundskeeping, or schools, school grounds, groundskeeping, stuff like that, compost makers. More and more people are getting into the idea of being able to make this sort of compost. And, it's coming along slowly but surely. People are learning this way of approaching things, but you'll get samples from those folks every now and then. Some of those clients that showed up early on, just referred through Soil Food Web, just from me being on the website, are still sending me samples regularly. One or two agronomists that keep sending me samples, and others that keep coming back a little less often, some more often, and then new ones keep showing up. I've been able to boost my presence just in search engines and such. And one thing about that is I seem to be getting a lot of calls these days from people looking for traditional soil tests, but more and more honestly are looking to the biological route as well. And you wind up doing things like having these conversations. I don't mind putting some time in just talking to someone on the phone, because this is one of those things where in this role we serve as largely as educators and communicators. We follow Dr. Elaine not only in understanding and applying this science, but also acting as communicators and educators. And so here, this slide, this is where I have my lab set up in my house, in a room in my house. You may be able to tell that I'm actually sitting in that chair right now with the microscope there behind me right now. Of course, there's a box with some soil samples, and I'm just running samples. There's my monitor with my camera, and I can take pictures, which is another great tool. The technology these days with the biological microscopes and the cameras keeps getting easier and easier to use. And that's great because, again, back to our role as communicators and educators. Next slide, please. You can put together things like, you can use things like pictures. You can see there on the right-hand side, I like to put some pictures up on my soil test. And that's just as a way to help draw people in. A lot of people learn visually. Most of us probably do. And if you can see something, it just helps people to grab on. Okay, yeah, now this is what I'm looking for. This is what I want. It helps that process of moving along and understanding what we're getting into here. And then the other pictures are just, pictures that help people to, this is, again, things that people are not terribly familiar with. For a conventional soil test, they might just grab some soil, regardless of how much moisture might be in it or whatever, throw it in a box or an envelope and send it on. But, you have to be a little more sensitive with it when you're talking about things that are living. And so I like to, use whatever visuals I can and that sort of thing to just, help people understand this is how you approach it and so on. And so that's that. Next slide, please. So yeah, this is just a nematode. Quite honestly, I just like to throw this picture up because I'm kind of proud of it. It's probably one of the better nematode pictures I've ever taken. Bacteria feeding nematode. But the thing about this one is that I remember the story behind it. It wasn't too long ago. It was a soil test that may be pretty typical of a lot of the soil tests you get, in that there really wasn't much in it. There was nothing. Like, I didn't expect to find anything in the soil test, in this soil sample. And then all of a sudden here I find this nematode. It's a really impressive one. Big, obviously doing quite a bit of nutrient cycling on the bacterial side of the ecological dynamics we're working with here. And, it's nice when that happens, because that's one of these situations where you get to go to the client and say, okay, your soil isn't great, but look at this great nematode. There's reason for hope. You have been doing something good. Let's keep looking at that. Let's keep moving that forward. And it's nice to be able to deliver those moments to your clients and, and see those light bulbs flash and that sort of thing. And let me make sure that I'm hitting all the correct points here. Average day in the life of the business is, despite having the advantage of the referral network through Soil Food Web, which is a great advantage, and again, a lot of my clients came through that and still keep coming back to me. A lot of it still has to do with marketing, you putting yourself out there and communicating with those folks that are interested but still are not, taking that step, pulling the trigger. So, and in the meantime, and that's. Am I still on?
Yeah,
I thought
you're still there. Yep.
And I thought I had a technical thing going on there. Sorry. And yeah, so that's something that you can expect to spend a lot of time on. You have to find your own ways of getting out there and communicating with that community of folks who are very much interested. There's a lot of people out there interested in going this route, but again, there's a lot of education that people are seeking as well in order to do so. And that's the general thing that you're doing, whether you're doing a soil test right now or whether you're just talking to folks on the phone or something like that. That's the general role. And yeah, so that's my story.
Great. Thanks, Wes. Okay, we're going to go ahead and bring it Ronald. So Ronald, do you want to talk about your operation in your business?
Yeah, good morning, guys. Nice to be with you. Feel the team. Yeah, I have to repeat a little thing here that we need absolutely more of people working for regenerating the soils. And on my side, I will talk about what I'm doing large scale. Let's go next slide, please. So we are based the headquarters, the official office is in Geneva. However, I'm always at my clients in the growing season here in Europe, mostly working in Europe. These days I'm in Latvia, igniting the whole rural regeneration program on a large scale. Also being contacted by people in Belgium, in Austria, in France, and people start to really wonder what is that we call soil health. Next slide, please. So what I'm doing, I'm basically supporting the farmers to make their transition large scale. And it's not just about me coming and just like they're delivering the whole transition. It's about getting them acquiring the skills so they can then continue their operation on the more regenerative hands-on work. So designing what needs to be done from point A to go to point Z in what we call soil health. So next slide, please. Yeah, my current operations, Latvia, here it's large scale. I have a program running on 60 hectares, France as well, Austria as well. The idea is like how to get the farmer getting away from this idea of risk, right? Because they all know how to grow food with chemicals and stuff like that. And as soon as you say, oh, well, we can do it organically, they all like scared, go back to their moms and start to scream because how will we do that? Is it actually possible to grow food without chemicals? Well, guess what? Yes, Mother Nature did that way before you. Anyway, so as these people didn't really learn that at university, well then, as Wes was telling us, just it's about engaging in teaching and repeating a lot, right? Because the mindset on conventional farming is not the same as in regenerative, right? And now here, idea is that what we do, we're going to look at that a little later on a little video, but yeah, cover crops, longer crop rotations, compost spreading, compost tea, and all the logistics pleasures that goes with it, plus the human side of things when you work with agronomes or farmers. It makes it very lively, let me tell you. Next slide, please. Sorry. Yeah, so basically bringing an idea of how long did that take from what Brian was saying earlier, like from the all foundation courses till operating. Well, all in all, you could get there in less than 2 years, right? It depends if you just have that to do using this period of our time where we're all kind of home, not working or stuff like that. I mean, in less than 1 year, you can achieve all that and then start on a program or a transition program here. So yeah, operationally speaking, I finished in November 2016. Then in 17, I was already doing that on a small scale market garden. So yeah, now can you, Brian, kick the little video so we can look what a typical work day look like on my side?
I think, Sam, you're going to go ahead and kick that off for me?
Yeah, so basically we have two main period, the off season and the on season, and on the on season, that's kind of little, are you guys seeing some video coming up?
The video is going to play in just a moment. I just wanted to remind our panelists that you are going to be muted while the video plays.
Okay.
Thanks, Sam.
So yeah, that's the idea. When you go large scale, you want to ask the farmer if they have any biology in their soil, right? And if they don't, well, because we've taken the right course with Dr. Elaine, we know how to do the actual biocomplete compost, which is loaded with microbiology and, well, beneficial microbiology, because this is what we need. Most agricultural lands, conventional lands, are dirt. So that means no life. So one way is to bring the compost back, but also do those compost teas that Brian was mentioning earlier. So that's kind of one setup that I have here in Latvia. And so the idea is to extract this microbiology in the liquid form, coming from the compost that you've done, then just multiply it, and then transfer it in whatever tool the farmer has, so you can bring it back to the field, right? So that's the bit of the idea. That's kind of a lot of beautiful pictures and videos and stuff like that, and also bringing on the idea of direct seeding, which is kind of the cutting edge technology for regenerating your soil, or at least stop to damage it. But yes, then, well, it's kind of what it looked like at when we seed. So we will now come back to my little presentation, which is nearly over what are the lows and highs of all that. Yeah, there's a lot of challenges. I mean, I gotta say, on the highs, just a lot of people, more and more farmers that are wondering what is it about that soil health thing, right? Everyone talks about organic matter. Okay, Elaine mentions water infiltrations, and then slowly we're going to go, oh, but what about my pest? What about my disease? And what about this? And what about that? Well, then this is the whole topic, right? We have to teach that. Making it real, meaning the high for me is like actually deploying it large scale. Why? Because I mean, most of the northerners countries, our countries, agriculture is about that. It's conventional. I mean, you would see here the warehouse where I work, the number of liters or of chemical that is in there, you would just freak out, right? So we need to bring this alternative. Absolutely, we need it. So compost making, yes, of course, because people don't know what good compost means, right? They believe just like decomposing, putrefying organic matter is compost. That's not true. Getting some results. You can see it with your microscope, but also you can start see your crops growing actually without chemicals, which is absolutely fantastic. Guess what? It works. Engaging with the farmer to just, be able to relate to what we're talking about, microbiology. How is the correlation between the microbiology and the crops, and what do we do? How do we do? It's interesting here on my side. I've started to produce, I don't know how many tons of compost, maybe 200 tons to start with a small turner, and now these people are doing like 10,000, or 20,000 tons of compost per year. It's like, and they talk about compost every time I'm here with everyone around, is that they're proud of it. So that's kind of the the highs, yeah, working a lot. Like now I look myself in the camera, I look like so wasted because I'm working 14 hours a day, but that's what it takes. It's not a job that I picked because it's kind of fancy and stuff. It's because I love it, and it's because we need it. And so on the lows, yeah, I mean, you know, as I was mentioning, a lot of chemicals is used every day all over the world. So then bringing this breach into the system, because we have no other way. They use chemicals. Well, what else can we just provide? So then the farmer can make a correlation between what they use, why they use it, and what we can propose. Well, that's kind of the bioagent type of things. Within a current system at large scale, the real challenge is to include all the transition operation in the current operations, which in high season is really stressful. I mean, farming large scale is about business and then farming somehow, right? Finally, then other difficulties, of course, challenges, depending where you are on the planet, you may not have all the resources available to do a beautiful compost. So you have to be creative. And then machineries, logistics, people understanding, not understanding. Look, I'm in Latvia now. People don't really speak English. My agronom does, but people on the land driving machines, not really. So it takes a lot of science and understandings and kind of dull kind of little stories. And still, yeah, on the other side, the long hours is something that can be at the end of the season a bit of a low. So yeah, that's my take. I hand that over to, I guess, you, Kisha, and Casey, or maybe you, Brian.
Yep. Thank you, Ronald. Fantastic. I hear your sentiments. Your highs and lows are very similar to mine. So, but now we'll go ahead and hand this over to Keisha and Casey from Catalyst Bioamendments. So go ahead, take it away, guys.
Keisha Wheeler.
Casey Ernst.
We own Catalyst Bioamendments in Nevada County, California. We're actually located in Nevada City, just outside of town at the Woolman Farm. We've been in operation for what, 2.5 years now?
Mm-hmm.
2.5 years, it's official. Brian, go ahead and flip to the next slide.
Sure.
So before we got into composting, we're missing the slide, but that's okay. I'll go ahead and explain anyhow. Before we got into composting and working with Elaine, we were actually in Ecuador, working on a permaculture farm really, really far away from the closest road. So we would hike in volunteers and all of our food and our stuff up this 5-mile trail to the top of a mountain, where we would teach them how to plant their own food, how to cook, how to build their own houses. And we found Dr. Elaine Soil Food Web School trying to figure out a way to really push fertility in the space that we were at. One of the really big rules at Sacred Sueños is that we don't bring in fertility from other places. We don't rob nutrients from one place and bring it to another. The founder of that community, that was something that was really strong in him, and so everybody that lived there had to abide by it and agree with the rules. So we were making compost for years, and we expected that we would just take the classes from Elaine and then improve our situation up there. And what ended up happening was we took classes from Elaine and we got hooked into composting. It was really obvious that there were not a lot of people doing, biologically focused composting at scale. And so, we met 2 other people, Zach and Greg, at one of Elaine's classes in Oroville, the in-person classes everyone's talking about that are so lovely. And we just took off and started Catalyst Bioamendments.
I guess I'll take from there. This slide here is basically just showing like our daily life is and how we kind of developed our business is, we on the left-hand side, you see that small turner. That's how we kind of got started, was with the smallest turner, the most affordable turner that we could buy. And we, bought it and just kind of hit the ground running. We produced a lot of compost with that thing, and just kind of developed our technique and recipes and just playing around by adding, different materials and different ratios just to kind of see what's working out best. But then, it's nice to start small because you can make your mistakes small. If you go big, you make big mistakes. So it's kind of nice to transition into it. So that's kind of where we moved into the Bachhaus turner there on the right. We can make 5 times as much compost in the same footprint just because it's self-propelled and all that. But like I said, it's you mess up one of those piles and you've messed up a lot. So Brian, you can go to the next slide. I guess, yeah, too, just as far as our daily lives go, it's a lot of machine work for sure when you're dealing with composting operations. It's a lot of checking piles, looking at temperatures, recording moisture, and sourcing ingredients and materials. These pictures here, you can see we had a fire come through, and so we had to develop a new pad. But this is our new pad there on the top left, and that's it full down there on the right.
You could see in the past slide, our very first lot had these 3 small windrows that were really widely spaced. And then when we got the Bachhaus, you see the 4 piles. On this lot, we're producing as much is it 2 windrow? One windrow as we produced in the first year that we did business. So you guys will often hear that Catalyst Biomimesis is always sold out of compost. At this point, we've actually scaled up to a point where we're not always sold out. There's a lot of compost on that lot right there. It's hard to tell from the picture, but those are 180-foot windrows. And now, our daily life is so different. We're not spending so much time hand hustling trailers full of wood chips and, going from farm to farm, picking up ingredients. Now we're trying to just secure large amounts of clean ingredients, which is far more difficult, far more difficult than you would imagine. Sometimes we spend days on the phone trying to seek out the right materials without finding them. Often we have to purchase our materials or figure out a way to grow them ourselves. And if you move forward to the next slide, Brian, we are super excited to announce that we are now selling our compost in stores. You could just pass through that one. That's us doing our daily stuff at the farmer's market with our bags of compost, me on the microscope. Casey's still really working by hand a little bit, building those big windrows. But there we go. Those are our very first bags that we've ever attempted to put on a shelf. We've been following the life of the microscope for about a month now. Everything is still alive. Our nematodes are actually reproducing. So it's really, really nice to look in a bag and find more life than when I put it in there. It was a shock to me. I'm guessing those are not going to be the bags that we use in the end. There's so much trial and error to this work. You got to use the microscope. You've got to keep looking. You've got to pay attention. And so now a lot of what we do is, Casey's working with the CDFA all the time, trying to refine the language, and we're just cutting through red tape at every turn, trying to figure out a way to fit in with the current composting system. It's like Ronald mentioned earlier. It's like it's reduced waste, and so there's a lot of red tape around the processes because fires can happen. There can be contamination. There's lots of issues. So as a compost producer, if you choose to go that way, you're going to be pressing through some rules that other people haven't necessarily thought about having to work with at this point.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the lows for sure of the whole thing is, it's just like language. Like they went through our entire website and made us take down anything that mentions biology because we don't have certain tests done and all this kind of stuff. So it's once you get into the legal world, of biology and compost, it's just red tape after red tape. But it's working. We're putting the energy in, and they are changing things. Like they've changed the classification of beer mash in Nevada County because it's not a food waste because of us. So that's kind of neat. Like things are moving forward and things are changing. So it's been a struggle. That's definitely like the biggest struggle for us, definitely. But
sometimes you find through these little pushes, like when we tried to get organically certified, right? We start working with the CDFA and CCOF. Which, you hear they're traditionally a nightmare to work with, but actually what they're trying to do is make sure that the biology that we say is in the product is there. So they pushed us now to, get DNA analysis on our compost, which is, wow, just fascinating. Like, I think there's a lot when I look through my microscope. Holy cow, sequence the DNA on your compost. It's so much information, so much overload, but it's a cool place to be. It's something that really made me nervous at first is now, it just made us level up. And so now, yeah, we're going to be looking at the DNA on multiple piles, and we're going to be trying to figure out a way to speak on our packaging and speak on our website about these microorganisms in a way that the governing agencies agree with. So when we get there, I think that's going to feel really good. Although right now it's a low. I think, like Renaud said, sometimes your lows are your highs. So keep our fingers crossed that we can move through all the red tape and through all the governing bodies and get this stuff out into stores for people, and that we can keep it in a bag without killing it all. So, follow our journey online. We're talking about it all the time for those of you who are trying to get started, thinking about taking the classes. Of course, we recommend it. Having that foundational knowledge before you start making your compost is one of the most important things you can do. So thank you, Elaine, for that. Appreciate it.
Well, I'd sure like to talk with you about how do you use the DNA analysis information to make a statement that bureaucrats understand.
Oh yeah, I think I would like to talk to you about it as well. We'll call later.
But it's fantastic. You guys are actually, pioneering this and breaking down some doorways. I mean, all of us that put that energy in will hopefully pay dividends for those that follow us. You know what I mean? So thank you for that kind of work that you guys are doing.
Thanks to all you guys too. It's a great team to be a part of. It's
Great community.
It's better every day.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Anything else, Keisha and Casey?
No, I think that's it. Ready to do some Q&A now.
Or
Almost.
Or whatever's next. Oh, we got videos coming up.
I'm gonna go next. I'll go next, and then we'll do some Q&A. And I'll keep it short because some of my story falls very similar with everybody else. So I'm Brian Vag. I own Sprouting Soil, and I'm a soil biology consultant. My wife and I created this business about 5 years ago. We have a 5-acre homestead here in Auburn, California, so Northern California. My wife and I both came from the high-tech industry. We both worked in the computer industry for a couple decades. But homesteading, growing foods, healthy living, that was always a very big passion of ours. And that's really what got us into the space. And we decided to make that change. We said, you know what? It's time for us to make a big shift in what we do and actually feel like we're helping humanity in a way, and helping the earth and helping the ecosystem and all those other kind of good things. So that's really what kind of drove us into the space. Now, as far as our business focus, we are a consulting facility, and we do lab services, and we do remediation. So we'll spray compost extracts and teas and do things like that. I would say right now that most of my clientele is in large-scale agriculture. So I do a lot with orchards, so nut crops, almonds, walnuts, pistachios. I also have a lot of vineyard clients. I've also got a lot of large-scale annual, like tomatoes, cucumbers, melons, and things like that. And I have landscaping companies that I consult with, as well as residential, large-scale homesteads or farmsteads. So I'm very general in my practice, and I think there are a number of folks that that kind of focus in a particular area, and that's great, especially if you had a lot of experience already before you moved into this this type of career, and now you become an expert in that particular plant or crop, and include the soil biology aspect of it. But my tact was much more to be a very generalist in sense, where I have a lot of different agriculture systems that I touch. And really, when you take it from that stance, I'm not a expert almond grower or an expert vineyard or an expert in all these different growing systems. So I look at it as a partnership with those farmers. They know how to grow their crops very, very well. I know about soil biology, and it's the partnership between the two of us that helps make that transformation. And yeah, exactly. You've got to, and I think when you express that with your client and say, look, we're going to work together, and we're going to help transform your management practices. We're going to make sure we help your biology, not harm your biology, things like that. They're very, very receptive to it. And it's also fascinating. I'm learning a ton about how do you grow almonds? How do you grow walnuts? How do you grow grapes? I mean, at some point, I'm picking it up through osmosis, all these different farming techniques that they do. So it's fascinating in that sense as well. All right. And so, I kind of mentioned about our clients. And you know, I have to say that, you know, I think this is a very standard way that a lot of people will approach it is, you know, be a generalist in sense until maybe you get a name out for yourself in a particular environment, and then all of a sudden you've got a lot of clients in that space. You know, right now I'm doing a lot in orchard crop.
Oops,
So
she
I'm getting a
froze.
lot of new orchard crop clients. So at some point that may, yeah, may dwarf everything else. Yeah. All right, and kind of a day in the life. I would have to say that every day seems to be different for me. I do a lot of different questions come my way from consultants. I have this pest problem, this disease issue. I want to use this brewer. I've got this spray rig. Can we use it? There is just a never-ending set of different sets of questions that we have to deal with. So it definitely does not feel monotonous in that sense. But I will also, echo what Ronald was saying is there's some long hours. You know, this time of year, especially, everybody is into their starting their growing operations. The plants are all waking up, and things are happening and things are moving. And you know, you can work quite significant amount of hours in this time frame. You know, right now it's pretty much 7 days a week and 10, 12 hours a day type of thing. But even though I'm tired, physically tired, mentally I'm very energized. You know, it's fantastic to be able to do that. You know, I do a lot of microscope work as well. So, you know, I get a lot of soil samples, both from soil and compost and things like that. You have to write reports, you get calls with clients. I really do like my on-site visits. I've got clients, a lot of them in California, but I do have some that are outside of California, and in some cases I do have to travel to go do some on-site visits to their facilities. And there's a lot of research. When a client comes to you and says, I've got this particular disease or I got this pest problem, I don't know necessarily enough about that pest. I've got to go research and find that out. And I love that aspect of this work, which is, you know, gaining knowledge. It's educating myself. It's a really rewarding aspect to it. And then a lot of business admin. You know, you got to write invoices, you've got to set quotes out and proposals and things like that. So let's talk about some highs and some lows. So highs for me really is a sense of purpose. You know, I feel like I'm really making a difference, not only in my own life, but in lives of others. And that's hopefully the lives of the farmers that I work with, but also the lives of the consumers that consume the products coming from my farmers. I do feel like I am making a difference. And I really do also like to see, you know, when you're working with a client, especially with the ones that are a little bit skeptical, like, I don't know, does this stuff really work? Let's do a trial. And all of a sudden they're like, wow, okay, this germinated faster than we have on their other ones. We're getting much more significant growth. Our crop is yielding higher, you know, and that positive impact is just awesome to feel like, oh yeah, I really helped make a difference for you. And I mentioned about constantly learning, you know, for me, education of myself and my understanding is a hobby, but now I get to do it for a job. It's fantastic. Lows, definitely business admin. You know, this is my first time owning my own business, so there's a lot of work that I had to put into. Okay, what kind of taxes am I talking about? What do I have to do with payroll, and how do I, you know, do all these other insurances and things like that? It's intense, and I'm sure for those of you that have already owned your own business, you already have some skills in that sense. It won't be as a low for you necessarily. And some people actually like running their businesses. And to me, it's not my favorite aspect of the job, but it's necessary. I have to run my business or I don't make money. Time management is the other thing. When it gets really busy and you have a lot of clients, keeping yourself really well organized and making sure that you can assign the appropriate time frame for those clients is really, really big. And the other low is probably some peaks and valleys of workload. You know, there is the time, and this is kind of goes with farming in general, because most of my clients are farmers. You know, there are times of year when it's intense. It's, you know, we kind of call it game on. We're really working very hard. And then we get in certain periods where the farmer's like, okay, you've helped me. I now need to go harvest my products. I need to do some things. So I need to put a break on, you know, our interaction for a month or two while I do these things. And so you can get kind of these peaks and valleys. But as a generalist, one thing you are able to buffer that with is, you know, I have residential, I have landscaping clients, other things like that that definitely do keep me somewhat busy during those low periods. So managing the peaks and valleys can be a little bit challenging, but as you do this more, and I found every year it gets a little bit easier to manage the peaks and valleys. So that is my business and kind of where I'm at, or at least I'm coming from. So I think we've had all the panelists kind of give us a day in the life of what they do. And before we move on to our animation, I know there's some questions that have been rolling in. And so let's go ahead and take a few of those, panelists. The first one came from Mel, and this is kind of a specific question, but I think it has a general implication to it, which is how relevant is the qualification for the UK, please? So I think what Mel's trying to ask is, all right, well, you guys are in California, but some of you, Ronald, you're in Europe. Does this apply in the UK? And I think you really asked that question of, does this apply in X location? Anybody want to take it?
But we have advisors, consultants in the United Kingdom, in some in Ireland, on the northern England, and then down in the southwestern part. So they're not finding any difficulties, as far as they've related back to me, in getting things through the regulations. So not really a problem. And as we show them that this process works, that what we're doing is the indigenous sets of microorganisms. We're not bringing things in from foreign sites where, gosh, you can't know for certain that those exotic microorganisms will behave themselves. We're dealing with the indigenous, the local things. We're selecting those microorganisms that are already in the environment. You're not bringing something strange and different into the system. So it's just working with the existing regulations, and we're doing pretty well, I think, worldwide in being able to deal with them. California is probably the worst.
California probably is the worst. So we have a lot of clients that we can consult with that make compost all over the U.S. and there's many places where they don't even have rules and regulations set up. They haven't even really considered, what could happen in a thermophilic composting situation. So I think it's good to know that if we can get through in California, I think you could get through in most places. I mean, I hear over and over again that California is the worst. So congratulations if you don't live here. It's going to be here.
Oregon comes in second. Let's move to Connecticut. It's pretty easy there.
How about Missouri? It's easy there.
Well, I think too that if we're able to get in contact with the right folks, like what Keisha and Casey are doing with working the regulatory boards, and start to get them to understand what we're trying to achieve, and they become invested in what we're doing, then the regulations potentially could help us, because that may really try to force industry into saying, all right, well, we need to address good biology, and maybe biology is not just some weird secondary thought. It maybe is a primary aspect of making compost is what we should be shooting for.
You mean there's something more than E. coli in there?
Exactly. That's all I'm testing for.
I think the biggest issue with the entire compost industry is that the compost is a waste product of waste reduction. That's really what it comes down to, is that they're not setting out to make compost. They're setting out to reduce the waste that they're receiving. And that's where they make all their money. The compost is what they're basically getting rid of or throwing away at the end. So that we need to change the entire industry, really.
Yeah, and really, when you get down to it, like the government, I always thought of them as the government, but they're just people. We go into the office and we meet lovely people that care, and you can change rules. I thought it was so much more difficult than it is. It's just really explaining yourself and being able to prove your point and make sense to the people you're talking to. And oftentimes it's just a meeting they need to have with the higher ups, and they'll push your ideas across, and then boom, laws are changed. And I don't know. I think there's a lot of room for us to get out there and let people know what we're doing, and really start to investigate these rules and poke at why they were made in the first place, and maybe differentiate between ourselves and the large scale waste reduction plants, because they're different.
Mm-hmm. And it's that big point of convincing the regulators that what has been called compost for the last 45 years isn't anything even close to the real definition of compost. So you get that through, and now they're, okay, we can have two different sets. We can have reduced waste materials, and here are the rules for that. And then here are the rules for real compost that has this massive diversity of microorganisms in it. And the food web controls itself. So you don't have to worry about, some horrible plague comes and rampant and takes over the countryside. It's not ever going to happen with compost.
Yeah. And, I think to just a general standpoint, anywhere we have a growing system, we're going to need compost producers, but we're also going to need consultants. I mean, the vast majority of growing systems in the world today follow the very conventional methods that have been established since the 1950s, which is, heavy tillage and lots of petrochemical fertilizers and pesticides and fungicides and things like that. And so I think in the UK that exists. I think that exists pretty much anywhere really in, across the world. So I think the opportunities are abound really everywhere.
Yeah, so if you're somebody from the UK and you want to get into the group of Soil Food Web folks, just let me know, and I'll let you have Glenn's address and Daniel's, and you can now start meeting with the what is the group called? It's the Real Farmers. The Oxford people have a meeting every year, so want to get you in with those folks as well. Just let me know.
Exactly. Yep. Okay, I'd say let's take another couple questions here. We've got a question from Brownie, and Brownie says, our organic biodynamic-based vineyard has access to large amounts of post-press waste, skins, etc. Would like to make compost for vines. Anyone doing this? What would ideal components be? So I'll take this one to start with because I do have vineyard clients, and yes, we make compost out of the waste materials coming out of the vineyard or winemaking process. So that's the skins, that's the stems, the pumice is the term that they use for that. And really, one of the things you'll learn in the classes is, your materials that you choose are important. You don't want to have just two components. I see a lot of compost that's made with manure and bedding. The quality of the compost coming out of those operations is usually pretty poor. So in an operation like this vineyard, yes, we have the skins, the stems and so forth, and that's fantastic to use, but making sure we have other sources of woody, green, and high nitrogen materials to make sure we have a complex set of food sources to make good microorganisms in that compost. I'm sure Keisha Casey or Dr. Lane, you guys have some
Ronaldo
as well.
Ronaldo.
Yeah.
You do vineyards as well? Yeah.
I can only confirm what you said, Brian. I actually have an interesting story here. The French farmer I'm working with is in the Champagne region, and he's the biggest farm around. So he collects all the leftovers from the champagne making. And he had one guy hired, I don't know, 5 years, 6 years ago, who tried to do some what he called compost, but he failed. And the guy just then the farmer had such a prejudice on making compost. He had bought massive machines and but he was not really applying our method that Dr. Elaine has been teaching. And so it has been an idea of showing and convincing that we can make it. Actually, the guy was so challenging that I even doubted myself, even though I had already produced a lot. And turned out, as Brian was saying, that adding more biodiversity in the resources, we ended up having extraordinary compost. And then now, of course, doing a massive amounts of teas and compost spreading. So yes, composting with from the grape and the wine industry, absolutely, but not with just two resources, with the maximum you can.
You can't make it just with pumice and stalks and dead leaves. Sorry,
Right.
you have to have a few other things in there.
No, but yeah, because it's gonna go back to fermentation and alcohol. There's still some sugars in there, so
For sure.
Wes, did you have?
No, I don't feel that I can really. No, you guys are the experts on this question. You guys are.
Casey.
Yeah, I'm just mirroring what everybody else says. You can compost almost anything if it's a clean material. It hasn't been sprayed heavily with chemicals. But yeah, always diversity, diversity, diversity. You'll hear us say this over and over and over again, but the more input materials, the better. And then over time, it just keeps improving. So yes.
And it gets easier and easier to get your mycorrhizal fungi established on the root systems of those grapevines. So all your vines below ground are connected. Everything in the vineyard is healthy because they're all sharing nutrients between the root systems. There's got to be a lot of bartering going on down there. And having the compost for the fungi to get their nutrients from just means everything works more quickly, more rapidly. You couldn't ask for an easier system to be growing a crop. And terroir comes from the soil. So when vinologists start talking about the quality of the product, of the wine that they're making, we've worked with vineyards where before we started with them, they were making okay wine. They had never won a contest of any kind, competition. The first year that we've got decent mycorrhizal colonization on the root systems of their grapevines, they got their first silver medal at one of those shows. And the next year they took gold medal. And every year they've been able to maintain that. So their reputations in the winemaking industry has just blossomed. And it's all because of the biology in the soil, because they were making good compost.
Yeah, and I think that's some of my clients in the vineyard space, natural winemaking, terroir is something they're really highly focused in on. And I think it's absolutely true that when you have systems that are running with the soil food web and the nutrient cycling happening, where the plant's getting exactly what it needs when it needs it, versus we're giving it things and we're hoping that we provide the right nutrients, but probably providing some minor stresses, either because we provided too much or there's not enough of a particular micronutrient that it needs, that the terroir is just not the same. And so I think there's going to be a lot of folks in the natural winemaking space that are going to really try to adopt these principles just because of that. Okay, anything else on this question? All right, it seems like there's a lot of composting questions, so we're going to maintain on that thread for just a second. And this is something that, Keisha, you just hit on a little bit here. This one's from Becky, and Becky says, can real composting deal with the Roundup in the materials in hay? So contamination with products.
Yeah, I mean, sure. Elaine says it all the time. There's nothing on this world, on this planet, that can't be broken down by microorganisms. But when we're talking about, I think there's a difference between thoughtfully trying to break down toxic materials and just saying, oh yeah, the microbes got it, don't worry, this compost is safe. Because I think there's definitely examples where the microorganisms break it apart and now you have a compound that's even stronger than before. And do we have testing methods that go ding? Like there's some, it's not that easy, right? So we do have plans in the future when we have more space to really thoughtfully try to create compost where we are purposefully putting these compounds in so that we're selecting for the microorganisms to break them down. But that's going to take space for trial and error, right? So, and maybe even pairing up with these waste reduction facilities and, getting these people to actually start thinking about how do we develop a culture where we can actually break down these chemicals. And I don't think glyphosate is the worst of them, right, Elaine? I mean, there's even nastier stuff out there that we just
like
commonly spray in our yard.
Dicamba.
Yeah, exactly.
It is tricky though. Like we have to be super selective with our materials because I mean we just recently found out they spray something on the grass so that they can bale it wet so that the whales weigh more. You know, it's just like they have a spray for everything. So it's like you have to be careful with the input materials. We've lost piles because the grasses that we had to purchase were covered in we don't know what. You know, so it's just like it can be hindering to your process if you have limited space. That's for sure. So you got to be careful.
Yeah, I can add up on that here on my own experience. Just for fun, with my agronome, so they have coated seeds, right? Because that's the standard. And so he decided to do a windrow with some of the coated seeds. Well, I can tell you the number of turns that we had to do to take the temperature of this windrow down was at least 5 to 10 times more, which means chemicals, you can compost it, no problem. But how long, what is it going to create? After I had a look with my microscope, what was in there? Well, yes, mostly bacteria, right? And this kind of how much bacteria, how much fungi, how much nematodes, this stuff you learn in the course, and how to put that into metrics so we can compare, right? Yeah, you can do whatever you want with anything, but what is the result? How do you use it? You know,
Now that you've got so many bacteria that are going to wipe out this one particular chemical, maybe not that useful on the other things out there.
Yeah,
exactly.
We always hear the solution to pollution is dilution, but once all those microorganisms are gone, it's not a solution anymore. So it is something that we need to be thinking about. We need more people thinking about and actively doing something about, you know, beyond just thinking, like getting out there and doing the work and figuring out the answers to these questions. It's vital for us, really.
Yeah, and for that, I want to add just a little thing here. So then, of course, engaging with my farmer and asking him, do you know how much of your glyphosate that you have in your soil now? Right. So the question was why? Doesn't that go away? Well, pragmatic. Let's figure out. Let's make some tests. And this year will be maybe one of those first years where they're going to take some samples of how much glyphosate is left on the trial side with the microbiologist. So that's now we started 2 years ago. We're going to see. After 2 years, have we still got some glypho, blah, 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 chemical, you name it, right? And we're going to figure out, I mean, most probably there is some science out there that has kind of measured on a lab setting, but on real scale, I mean, it's being pragmatic and so engaging with the farmer as well. Because if tomorrow the regulation changes, well, they have to know for themselves. How long does that take to just remove that from your soil, but also from the crops? Because this is what is at stake. How much of those residues is on your crop when you come put in your mouth, on your baby's mouth, right? Thinking about that engages some sort of responsibility, isn't it?
There are some publications in the scientific literature that shows that this constant use of glyphosate finally kills off all of the organisms that have any ability to decompose that glyphosate. And then the amount of glyphosate is accumulating so rapidly in that soil that the plant is forced to take up some of that glyphosate. And that material is now systemic within the plant's body. And of course, it's going to get put into the reproductive tissues. So you're eating tomatoes with glyphosate in it. And that, think of what that does to your digestive system and the microorganisms you have to have in order to be able to digest things properly. So it's becoming a worse and worse problem. And when do the authorities finally understand that there's science already done, which is being ignored? At least in the United States, it's being ignored. And it's a health risk, a huge health risk.
Soon, hopefully soon. I mean, as more and more farmers start to make this change and the consumers really start to push for having foods that aren't being grown in these, heavy chemical kind of situations, yeah, I think then we'll start making large scale changes. And to be honest with you, I'm seeing it happening. There's such significant interest from large scale farmers because they know the consumers are changing. They know that the tread that they're on right now is unsustainable. And so I think in the next 5-10 years, we're really going to see quite a massive shift. So
I think it's
Hope so.
interesting. I was just going to say, I think it's interesting to note. Go ahead.
No, I said we need more people like you guys listening to us to come embark in this crusade. That's the truth. I mean, that's my truth.
Yep.
Really.
The thing I was thinking is that when Roundup came along, it really improved things environmentally and not for farmers too, because before that, farmers would have to have a cocktail of pesticides and have, various applications throughout the year. And then Roundup came along and it was like it shrunk their number of applications and they could use just this one chemical, broad spectrum pesticide or herbicide. And it improved things. But despite that, in the years since, those farm profits have continued to go down. The environmental problems have continued to get worse despite that improvement. And that's just kind of gives you this perspective on how bad this global problem is. It just keeps getting worse no matter what improvements are made along the way in that conventional approach to producing plants.
Right. Agreed. Okay, I tell you what, let's go and switch gears here. Let's go ahead and watch an animation on soil structure, and then we'll be taking some questions from the audience around that animation. So for you audience, we're going to start a video here in just a second. As you watch it and you have some thoughts or questions that you might have, make sure you post them in the question section, and us panelists will go ahead and discuss those. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and kick off this video on building soil structure. And just a note, panelists, remember you'll go on mute once I start this video, so make sure to unmute yourself. All right.
Why is it important to have well-structured soil? A well-structured soil will allow water to gradually flow through it. As the water passes down through the soil profile, it creates a vacuum, and so fresh air is drawn into the soil, thus creating aerobic or oxygen-rich conditions. This is crucially important, as the majority of disease-causing microbes cannot operate in oxygen-rich environments, and they are forced to shut down. Meanwhile, beneficial microorganisms thrive in oxygen-rich environments. Water droplets are held in the numerous cracks and crevices, and in organic matter for long periods of time, thus increasing drought resistance. Good structure allows plant roots to move effortlessly through the soil profile without having to work hard against compaction layers. In soils where good structure has not been built by beneficial microorganisms, compaction layers are easily formed by vehicles, by human and animal traffic, and where the soil surface is left bare by rainfall. Compaction layers force plant roots to grow sideways, limiting their access to nutrients and water. When plant roots break through compaction layers, they encounter anaerobic or low oxygen conditions. Those are occupied by anaerobic microorganisms, which produce highly acidic compounds. Roots cannot survive in such conditions where the pH can be lower than 4. When water flowing through a soil meets a compaction layer, it can't get through, and so, in heavy rain, this can result in a saturated layer of soil sitting on a hard compaction layer. If there is an incline, the topsoil can start to move, resulting in a landslide. This type of soil erosion is a big problem in many places around the world. So how is good structure built by the soil food web? Well, this depends on the type of soil we're dealing with. The terms sand, silt, and clay describe the size of the soil mineral particles. Sand particles are relatively big, and so are the spaces in between them. Water quickly finds its way through the gaps, and not very much water is retained, especially if the organic matter content is very low, as organic matter can absorb huge amounts of water. So sandy soils tend to be very dry and are prone to wind erosion, which is the process by which the topsoil is blown away and lost. Soil erosion is a serious environmental problem and poses an existential threat to humanity, as we only have around 60 years of topsoil left in the world, according to recent estimates. With the soil food web in place, the picture rapidly changes. Beneficial bacteria produce sticky compounds or glues. which make it easy for them to adhere to the surfaces of organic matter and sand particles. These particles then adhere to one another, forming microaggregates. Notice how as things clump together, small spaces are created around them. Fungi also produce some glues, and their long, narrow tube-like structures act like ropes, tying together the microaggregates to form macroaggregates. Now even larger spaces are formed in the soil structure. When microarthropods, earthworms, and insects burrow through the soil, they create even larger spaces like tunnels. All the while, the soil food web is increasing soil organic matter in the soil profile by decomposing the surface litter into humus and transporting it deeper and deeper into the soil. Soon you can dig down and discover layer after layer of dark chocolate brown soil, where there was once only lightly colored sand. The result is a structure that will hold water for several months after the rains have stopped, making it available to plants in times of drought. Roots are able to dig much deeper and to access more water and nutrients in parts of the soil that were never available to them before. In essence, the subsoil has now become topsoil. Dr. Ingham and her team have worked on landscapes such as pastures, turfed lawns, and golf courses, where the grass roots were only able to grow an inch or so into the soil because of the presence of compaction layers. In just a few short months after the soil food web is restored, those same roots are able to grow more than 3 feet deep, accessing more water and nutrients than ever before. In clay soils, the problems are a little different. Clay particles are often referred to as platelets, as they are kinda round and flat like the plates you have in your kitchen. Without a balanced soil food web, these platelets get stacked up on top of each other, forming very tightly compacted structures. Compaction layers can form very easily in clay soils. The solution to this problem is finding a way to get those clay particles to stop stacking. This can be achieved by a process called flocculation. Flocculation occurs when sufficient positively charged calcium ions are present on the surface of the platelets. This results in them repelling each other just like magnets do when their poles are aligned. The soil food web increases flocculation, and once this is achieved, structure can be built in just the same way as with sand particles. The result, once again, is a well-structured soil that enables plants to access more water and nutrients than ever before. For farmers, this means increased yields, cost savings due to reduced irrigation requirements, and even further cost savings as there is no longer any need to plow. Lower costs and increased yields result in greater profits. For the environment, there are a number of benefits. A well-structured soil that is home to the soil food web purifies water as it passes through the soil profile. This is because any contaminants in the water are seen by bacteria and fungi as nutrients, and are rapidly absorbed into their bodies as the water passes by. Soil erosion by wind and water are greatly mitigated, offering food security to future generations. And finally, water vapor is one of the most abundant greenhouse gases. By enabling more water to infiltrate the world's soils and to flow into aquifers, we may be able to contribute to the fight against climate change. If you want to help secure the world's soils for future generations, then sign up for the Foundation courses today.
All right. Great video on soil structure. And don't forget, folks, if you got some questions about the video you just saw, go ahead and please post that in the question section. Let me go back and present out my slide deck. And while we're waiting for students to actually, students or potential students to type in questions, I want to just give a brief example of something that happened to me just a couple days ago. So I was working with one of my farmers. This is an almond farmer. And in almond farming, they tend to leave the areas underneath the drip line or the trees bare. For their harvesting techniques and so forth. And we're trying to change that, but in the meantime, right now it's bare underneath the trees. And we planted cover crops in the raceways to try to really help build some soil organic matter and get biology into that soil. So we've hit the raceways with compost extracts. There's been light dusting compost. And what was very interesting, we were out doing some soil sampling and compaction measurements. We want to see what the compaction was in those trees. And when we were underneath the trees where it was bare, we still had a pretty good compaction layer of about 5 inches of really compacted soil. And it was really drying out. The soil was getting quite dry. And so when we're using the penetrometer, we're running into quite a bit of resistance. But move right over to the raceway, where all the tractors drive. This is where all the equipment goes up and down these rows, which typically is very compacted. And normally you walk in summer time frame, it's cracked ground. The ground's just really cracked, compacted. But because we did a cover crop and we did a roll and crimp, which means we terminated the crop and pushed it down and created a nice mulch layer on top of that soil, we walked over to right where the cover crop was at, and the moisture in the soil was still really good, and we could push the penetrometer right down that soil. And so my farmer was just completely blown away of, wow, bare soil underneath the trees, heavily compacted. Go where we drive the tractors, but we had a cover crop with putting good biology in there, and I have soil structure. I can actually push the penetrometer down the ground and maintain moisture, was just a total eye opener for that client.
Guess where all his roots of those plants now are? Out in those raceways, driving roads.
Exactly. Exactly. Yep.
Brian, I can confirm what you just said.
Sure.
I've been taking measurements for the past 2 years on one zone that has been subsoiled, had cover crop, and the same zone non-subsoiled with cover crop. And 1.5 years later, well, guess what? The non-subsoiled zone had received the work of the beautiful cover crop, and now no more compaction layer.
Right. Yeah, it's
This is
amazing
cool.
how fast you can turn that around.
There's magic.
Exactly. Okay, let me jump to a question here. This was a question, I believe from, give me 1 second, from Kev. And Kev says, is it difficult to convince your clients to till less? Anybody want to take that one?
They have to see the results first, I'd say, is you've got to take a small part of their property and put in the ground cover and show them, especially if they're so skeptical that they just like, I'm not sure, I don't think you're right, that's not going to work. You've got to ask them to let you show them that it works, and then they become believers after that. But it may take a year for you to be able to convince them over.
Yeah. That's very similar to me. Same experience where, some clients, they're already kind of down that road. That, no-till is becoming, I think, a very talked about topic. That there's a lot more information around farmers who are doing no-till being very successful in those types of things. So some clients are like, yeah, no-till, great, I'm there. Others are very hesitant or resistant to that. And like Elaine was saying, doing trials, that is really the best way to show two things with the trial. Shows your client that, yeah, here's the results you can achieve when you apply these techniques and methodologies. And that's really important, especially for those that are, on the fence or a little bit skeptical about it. Secondarily, though, and this is something that I really try to stress to my clients, is this is your opportunity in the trial to look at the management practices that you need to change at a small scale, so that now you understand what those changes are, and now we can make those changes at a large scale when we start to implement those things on their entire production. And so trials are, I think, an essential aspect of what we do to really help farmers make that transition.
A lot of the large scale farmers that call us, it's definitely their intention to reduce the amount of tilling, because you can't know how much time they spend on those tractors. It's insane for them. I was talking to a guy the other day that there's parts of the year where he's literally tilling into the night. Just reducing their till time by half would just, raise their profit margins by so much. But there's always that hesitancy, like, this is how we do it. They're nervous that if they don't continue to till, that the weeds are going to just take over. And in a transition state, sometimes that's unfortunately true. So there is the trial and error of slowly backing off and just making sure that we pay attention to all the aspects, so their worst fears don't come true.
For sure. In fact, I had a conversation with a large group of farmers. This was last week, and one farmer was really convinced that tilling in compost was what he needed to do, and what he has been doing every year. So we get a large amount of compost and till it in, but then also till to do weed suppression as well throughout the year. And so we had a conversation around, well, it's great you're adding organic matter, but the same aspect, you're taking 2 steps forward, 1 or 2 steps backwards every time you're doing this, because you're destroying the fungal networks, and you're not letting that microbial community really establish. And he was convinced otherwise. He was, no, I know when I till, I get the compost has fungus in it, it will be fine. The tilling's gonna wreck your fungi.
Yeah, it's going to be fine for the tornado to come by every spring and wipe your house out, because you can just rebuild it. So everything's fine.
No problem. Yeah. So there's some misconceptions with that as well. That's some of the education that Renal was talking about that we have to do. We have to educate our clients as well. And the best way, I told this farmer, I said, you know what? I'd be more than happy to go out to your location, and we could take a soil sample before you till and after you till. After you've got some biology in the soil, and let's see, proof positive. And so I'm not sure if he'll take me up on that or not, but yeah, it is a challenge for us. And no-till, I think, is really, in all systems, there are now techniques and practices you can use where you don't need to till, and weed suppression is definitely possible as well. There are ways to deal with weeds. Anybody else want to add on to this one here?
Yes, that's so true. What Keisha was saying, the challenge is the transition, because farmers are already formatted or used to some uses and practices, and even the idea of a clean field, which means dirt, dust all over the place. That's what they conceive as something which is clean. So when you come and you say, all right, well, no, organic matter, cover crop, blah, 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 all dirt, blah, blah, for them it is dirty. That's the first thing. And then I started no-till with my clients because they were really engaged, still are. And within this transition period as well, depending what kind of crop, we went to strip till to start with. Okay, strip tilling is not damaging that much than an actual tilling or disking or whatever, right? So as Keisha said, it's about, how you engage with your farmer to become this researcher for his own growing system, so he can figure out for himself, right? And I can tell you, on my side, I kind of brought this idea of, scientific methodology. You want to compare things? Well, just like take the scenario and then change one thing, and you will figure out. And now those people are just trying things around, and that's pretty fun to see. Yeah.
Exactly.
What have you set upon the world?
And I've got a question for Renee that this fits just right into what we've been talking about, which is, what do you say to farmers that are against cover crops, that think that cover crops will rob their cash crops of moisture, particularly in and during drought? And that example I used right in the very beginning was just proof positive, where the soil was bare underneath the trees. It got the same amount of water. In fact, the raceways get a little bit less water because the sprinklers don't quite reach out to that area. Where we had the cover crop, the soil was still moist. It still had moisture in it. Where it was bare underneath the trees, it was getting dry. It was drying out much faster. And so it is proof positive. If you have something covering the soil, roots, mulches, either living mulches or brown mulches, something that's providing that protection, you will evaporate a lot less moisture than bare ground. And so the other aspect about robbing cash crops, that is something I hear all the time from farmers, which is, I can't do that because those cover crops or those perennial plants are going to rob from my trees. And that's in a conventional systems where you're applying these products and there's no soil biology. When we have soil biology in the ground, it's constantly nutrient cycling. In fact, those cover crops or perennial cover plants, they're helping those trees. They're providing more microbiology to do more nutrient cycling. There's mycorrhizal connections, there's sharing of nutrients and water and all those kind of good things. So it is opposite from what is very much drilled into people from a conventional sense of farming.
If you go back into the scientific literature to where they were trying to convince farmers that the plants underneath the trees, or with tomatoes or something where you had lower level, they used the weeds as their cover plants. And if you're a weed, yes, you do take more water out. And the evapotranspiration on a weed is horrific because they're not going to be around very long. Why should they be caring about conserving water? So that's where the chemical companies really made a huge change in people's opinion by looking at that research. Now, people at the Washington State University have gone back and done those same trials, but with non-weeds, things that, plants that grow in more mature systems that you don't have those weedy characteristics. And every single time, way more moisture still left in the soil. Nutrient cycling is occurring. All of these positive things, because they are also adding, not killing the set of microorganisms in the soil off by using all those herbicides. And don't believe him when they say herbicides only kill weeds. There's no toxic chemical that kills just one species of organism.
I remember what the glyphosate did to our little garden in Oregon. Every plant.
Yeah.
If they're not Roundup ready, they're not going to live.
Yep.
All right. Any other comments from panelists? Okay, I tell you what, let's do this. Let's move on and watch the weed suppression video, and then we'll take some questions around weed suppression. In fact, we were just kind of timely for us to move on to that. And then we got about 20 more minutes of our webinar. So let me go ahead and start off this video. And again, panelists, we'll be putting you on mute, so make sure you unmute yourself.
How does the soil food web suppress weeds? Weeds are a specific group of plants that grow really quickly and then immediately produce seeds. They have very short life cycles when compared to other plants. Like all plants, weeds need a lot of nitrogen in order to grow, but unlike most other plants, weeds thrive on a particular form of nitrogen called nitrates. Most other plants require some nitrates too, but they need more of a different form of nitrogen called ammonium. In a natural soil, where no fertilizers have been added, nitrogen is readily available as ammonia. Some of this is converted to nitrates by a particular group of bacteria, known as nitrifying bacteria. Scientists have discovered that nitrifying bacteria can only operate in a pH environment of 7 or above. With a balanced soil food web in place, soil pH can be prevented from reaching 7 by beneficial fungi that produce acidic compounds. And so nitrifying bacteria are prevented from converting the ammonium to nitrate. So now, ammonium is the predominant form of nitrogen available in this part of the soil. That means that weeds don't get their favorite food, and so their numbers are kept under control, making way for other plants to grow. Here's a real-world photo where you can see the difference in weed growth after just one application of soil food web biology. You can clearly see the difference. For farmers, the benefits include reduced costs and increased profits, as they no longer need to spray weed killers. For the environment, this means less toxic chemicals are being used. For humans, it means safer food. If you want to free yourself from weeds, then sign up for the foundation courses today.
Right. So that's always good. I love that animation on weed suppression. It's always good to show farmers, especially the picture that you had, Elaine, of the treated versus the untreated. It's fantastic. Okay, again, if you have questions around weed suppression, go ahead and put it in there. I don't see any questions that popped in yet, so let's go ahead and take another question that was, I think, from the last topic on soil structure. The question was from T. Nixon, and the question is, you advocate compost on top of existing beds, but for new beds with imported soil, is it best to mix compost or put on top?
I'll take that one.
Take that? Sure.
When you're, a lot of people, it is really popular to do the top dress. But in almost every situation we've tested it in, just laying that compost on the surface of the soil, especially if there's nothing planted in it, it just leaves the microorganisms really vulnerable to the sun, which is really effective at killing organisms, the wind, and the rain, which can be quite compacting. We find that, especially the test we do with our material, that if those organisms are kind of treated as teeny seeds of life and mixed throughout the entire growing material, especially if they're given access to plant roots, the explosion of growth happens just far more quickly. I have had people argue this point and say, like, oh no, after I do an extract, I put all of that extra compost on the top layer, and look how amazing my plants are growing. And so, great, like however you choose to do it. But really, really good compost is either it's going to cost you a lot of energy to make or quite a bit of money to buy. So we try to figure out the way to use it as economically as possible. So I love telling people to get it in the soil when you till or mix, or use your broad fork to crack that ground open. Getting it to the root system is the best way. But putting it on top of the soil works too if you've got that kind of compost to work with.
I mean, even better yet, though, is just turn it into extract and water it in. It's the even easier way. You don't have, no machinery required, less damage on the soil, and it's just, you can soak it right in. So,
yeah. And, for me, it's one of those things where I look at how am I going to apply the biology, and what am I trying to achieve? If I have soils that are less than 3% soil organic matter, then I know I need to get organic matter into the system. And that could be by top dressing compost, tilling in compost, adding mulching types of systems, cover crops, those types of things. Once we start to get above that 3%, then we start to transition more from top dressing organic matter, that type of thing, into more using liquid amendments like extracts, just to make sure we got the right soil biology hitting the rhizosphere of those plants. Now, you're right. If you're in a system where you don't have any plants in, typically I tell farmers, we're going to till one last time. So if I'm talking about a field that we're going to, deep rip, get some compost extract down in there, apply some compost on top, and then, till it in, that's our start. From there on out, I'm going to say, all right, now let's not try to till that land and go into a no-till type of practice. When we have plots that have already plants existing in this situation, in this scenario, then we might top dress with compost, but I always try to get them to follow on with top dressing with mulch on top of that compost to keep a protective barrier on top of the compost, and also, to make that layer between the soil surface and the compost still moist and get that incorporation to occur. So there's strategies. There's some things you can do to top dress or to till in. Anybody else want to make some comments to that? Okay. All right, good enough on that one then. Let's see. Got a question here. Still don't have any weed suppression questions, so I'm going to jump to one. This one's for Keisha and Casey. And this is good about your operation. Thanks. I'm curious, how many yards, tons of compost Keisha and Casey produce in a year?
So right now we're limited by our fantastic local government to produce 1,000 yards a year. We have what's called an experimental compost permit. I think they invented that for us, which was really gracious of them. And it allows us an extra 500 yards a year than what the normal cap would be. So yeah.
It's all bureaucracy stuff. It all has to do with the access ways, and it has nothing to do with how much we could produce. It has to do with just the red tape. So
yeah, and if you were to flip it on your head, I mean, this is I guess kind of a trick question, but let's say you didn't have the regulations in front of you and you had unlimited access to starting materials, how much compost could you create?
Yeah, I would say
right?
We could go like 2,000 yards in the space that we're in, I would say, if we had everything. But like I said earlier too, it's it is a trick question, because like, how do you source that many clean wood chips, or that much green material? We have to make contracts with people, obviously, to get them to not treat their hay with preservatives, and then you have to pay extra because like you need to incentivize these. You're asking them to do something that they really might not want to do. And so it's, it gets tricky. With production like that. I mean, to make a couple windrows, we're bringing in 100 yards of wood chips. It's a semi truck essentially that comes in and drops material off. So the volume gets to be insane.
Well, I think that, a point to it is too, there's nothing about the way that we compost, making biocomplete or biologically complete compost, that would limit the size of the operation. It simply comes down to, do you have enough land, equipment, and starting materials to be able to make that compost and make it in the right way? There is no reason why we couldn't be making hundreds of thousands of yards of compost. There's no upper limit as far as I'm concerned.
No, it just, it has to do with your flows, your system flows. Is like, do you have the footprint space to produce that much, and do you have the equipment to turn it? Do you have the water that is necessary to keep it moist? You know, it just comes down to so many more factors than just space or your time. You know,
and getting a green waste facility permit is difficult, I think, anywhere that you're at, right? Like when you're trying to be the dump, it's just a whole nother level of reality. But, you know, farmers produce waste. Like that's the beauty of it, is there's so many people out there, like Ronald said, like they're producing so much waste on their own farm that they have to pay to get rid of. Well, that's an incentive to start, you know, really making a lot of compost. You're doing it on your own land. You're doing it without the county really on you. You just have to fill in the, you know, the extra ingredients is all.
Yeah.
That's one of the things we did in Australia with the dairy people down near Melbourne, was take all of the wastes that they had on their property. So they emptied out their manure lagoons. Oh joy, that reduced the disease in the animals by an incredible amount. And then take all their green materials when they're mowing the weeds from the side of the road, put that in there, and then straw bales were leftover, or you know, moldy hay, things like that went in as the in addition. And they have all their woodlots, so they can chop up their woody materials. So they had everything they needed on farm to be making enough compost to be putting it out at a rate of a ton per acre. And they saved, between not having veterinary bills, not having to pay for inorganic fertilizers, not having to have their pastures renewed, you know, where they had to go out and reseed and all of that stuff. In the first year, we saved them $200,000 on average for the 300-acre dairy farm. So that, you know, it's clear. We can do a lot.
That is actually the one big loophole in California for composting. If you produce all the materials on site, you don't need a permit at all. You can do whatever you want. So that's actually pretty neat.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I've got a number of clients that do that. They make on-farm compost. It's fantastic.
And what the people who own the composting yard, what they did was just put together places where they brought the turner and the water wagon and turned the compost on the days that it needed to be turned. So the grower didn't have to pay for a turner or the water wagon for themselves. They just rented it basically. And these guys came out and they ran it, went on to the next person, you know, did the turning there, went on to the next person. And they knew from the recipes exactly what days. It was 3 days to get up to heat. It was another day back in 24 hours to turn the second time. Then it would be another 2 or 3 days to come in and turn the third time. And then another 3 days to turn the fourth time. And then they'd usually come out and just turn it for the joy of turning. No, the regs said you have to turn 5 times. So they figured out exactly what was necessary, and it's still working just fine for growers down in Melbourne area.
Yeah, I think I think there is going to be some way that farmers can get together and make some composting co-ops. It just seems to me like if you have a diversity of farmers, like a dairy farmer, and you have a vineyard, and you have an annual farmer, they're going to have a different set of waste materials that they have to try to process to do something with. That there maybe is a way for these farmers to all band together and create some kind of composting co-op. Not sure exactly how that all would work, but it seemed like that's definitely a way to be able to maximize the diversity of materials and get the right materials into your composting operation.
That's so funny, Brian, when you say that. We were actually, I'm getting ready to write an email to you about just that.
Oh, cool. That's sweet.
I was like, there is a way, Brian.
All right.
And the brains have been working on it already. Yes.
Yeah, it's funny. We're all thinking along the same lines, and it just pops up.
Oh, totally. So, because you see it, I mean, you go to farms, some of them have waste. Yeah, I have one farmer that they pull up an almond orchard. You know, its life cycle is done, and you know, sometimes they burn them, but this farmer decided to chip them in massive amount of wood chips. And the idea is they want to make compost. He's like, I got wood chips, but I don't have anything else. You know, it's like,
Well, I got manure, but I
no,
don't have any chips. Wait a minute.
yeah, I know some people want your wood chips for sure, but the same reality is that you know, there's got to be a way to be able to band that together and make good compost. And so let's take one more question. And it's composting seems to be the question du jour of the day. And this one's from Mel. And Mel says, "What are the principal ingredients of BioComplete compost?"
It's so basic. It's so basic, Mel. It's it's woody material, it's green material, it's high nitrogen, and it's diversity. It's really that simple. And you know, since we have Catalyst where we have our, you know, our large scale, but at home I still tinker with small hand turn piles all the time because I can't stop myself. And I mean, if you've got that biological inoculum there, we like to use compost to get our compost started. The ingredient ratios can be just wildly all over. I mean, they can be all over the place. So you can treat different ingredients different ways, but basically stuff that grows in nature gets composted. And there's 3 categories. There's no big trick to it. It's very simple stuff. It's just like cooking, just with microbes.
Just a dash of Pseudomonas, a little bit, a pinch of this, and a gram of that.
But seasonally, it obviously changes, right? I mean, in the fall, you've got gorgeous leaves and tons of woody material, and during the winter, like, where'd all the greens go? Like, so, you know, you learn. In the school, they teach you everything you need to know about how you gauge your recipes and like what one ingredient does versus the other. And where it's a little complex in some ways, it's not.
Yeah,
easy.
it's like you said, it's in a way it is very equivalent to cooking. There is a recipe and a process that you follow, and then also learn how to use a microscope so you can tell, are you making it the right way or the wrong way? You know, what is some of the feedback that you're getting when you're making that compost pile? So yeah, FC2, all about making compost.
And if we went around the group and asked, you know, Ronald, what are his favorite organic materials to be putting into a pile to make a pile now, and then ask me and ask Brian and ask Wes and Keisha and Casey, they'd all be slightly different because Ronald is way over there in Europe and I'm up in Oregon, and you 3 are on different sides of the mountain. Up in Grass Valley.
We start to see things differently. So we'll be driving down the road and I see a pasture that's going to seed uncut, and I'm just like, look at all that potential green material. Or I see wood chips, and we're like, ooh, those chips. Those like oat chips. Those are good. Those mixed. Like, it becomes an obsession and a
Yeah.
it's like, instead of being like, ooh, I want pizza, you're like, I want diverse leaves for my compost pile this fall. It's a little weird.
Easy to figure out what you want for Christmas.
Yeah, for sure. If you send me wood chips, I won't be mad. Diverse wood chips. I don't want single
No,
squares.
Christmas time.
Not just one flavor. Yep.
Ooh, yeah. Fails to pay for Christmas.
Well, you know, and that's, I think, to a point, you know, we want to also learn how to store those materials, because there are some times when you're going to have great materials, but I'm just not ready to make a compost pile because maybe I'm waiting for some other materials to become available to me. So, you know, one of the things you'll learn is how to be able to cut materials, dry it down appropriately, how to store it so that you can, you know, go back to it 3-4 months down the road and say, okay, all that cut grass that I had dried and saved, now I use as my green material that I'm going to pull into my piles. And so there are just a lot of strategies to be able to make really good biologically complete compost, and it works really, really well.
Yep, drying is one of the best preservatives that we have. It's, you know, especially in a place like California, all you have to do is spread it out on a tarp on your lawn, And it's going to be dry in 2 or 3 hours.
You're poking fun at our drought.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're very water sensitive right now. But
And
yeah,
then
you're
there's Oregon.
absolutely right. Which is always wet, right?
Yep. Find a place where we can actually dry things down. That's a little fun.
Okay, well, I think we are at the top of the hour for this webinar. So I would like to give some thanks. Thanks to the participants, the audience that was out there. It's your, desire to learn more that drives us or fuels us. So thank you very much for attending today's webinar, and hopefully you got something out of it. And I hope some of you will see in the courses as well as potentially becoming colleagues down the road. I also like to thank the moderators working behind the scenes. So Luke, Maria, and Sammy for keeping the wheels going and grinding away here and keeping us all on track. So that's fantastic. And then the panelists, Ronald, Keisha, Casey, and Wes. Thank you so much for providing your expertise and your knowledge. And Dr. Elaine Ingham, can't say enough, the education that you provide to us and helping drive this community of folks is absolutely fantastic. And we feel very privileged.
So Ronald, what time is it where you are? It's like 1 a.m. already?
Hold on.
Talk about working long hours.
11.
Yeah. 11 o'clock. It's time.
11 o'clock. You've done a good
My
job.
agronom left looking at me like, okay, good night. Like,
So thank you very much for coming.
yeah.
Your poor employee just got off work. Oh my God. We work long hours. Brian, thank you.
Busy.
Yes, Brian, thank you. Absolutely.
Thank you.
You guys.
Okay.
Totally enjoy doing this. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Ciao.
Bye.
See you all. Till next time.